all. I think it's my turn to welcome you to what I believe to be the last panel for the conference, and it's the panel on architecture and boredom. Our first speaker will be Abel Franco, and he will present a paper titled Aesthetic Boredom, the Case of Architecture. Abel Franco holds an MA in history from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, PhD in philosophy from the University of Salamanca, and a PhD in history and philosophy of science from the University of Pittsburgh. He has taught in different City University of New York campuses, the University of Pittsburgh, and since 2006 at California State University, Northridge, where he's currently a professor in the philosophy department. Has written and given talks and published on the history of natural philosophy, on the history of philosophy, on the history and philosophy of mind, and on aesthetics. And his most recent article is titled Our Everyday Aesthetic Evaluations of Architecture, and has been published in the British Journal of Aesthetics, which is a great journal if you're publishing and reading philosophical works on aesthetics. I'm going to turn it to Abel for his talk, and just remember we have 20 minutes for presentations and then 10 minutes for questions. Thank you very much. You're muted.
Okay, now I'm coming out of the loneliness that I was talking about while you were not hearing anything. I didn't know you were going to do that with a little biography to read it. Otherwise, I would have simplified in one sentence the whole thing. Anyway, before I forget, thank you, Josefa. Thank you, Marius. I don't know if I'm pronouncing Marius' name correctly. This is quite interesting and well-organized conference. If I can mention one thing is that not having simultaneous sessions is a great thing and has to be defended. The other thing that has to be defended when they allow us, of course, is to see each other and hug each other. And all this said, I just apologize for not having been able to be more involved. I've been traveling and within a travel, and it has complicated things. But here we are. Let's go to the task. So let's see if I can share, because I haven't done it in Google Meets. So I guess I press the button, I do your entire screen, and that is not what I want to do. Or that is what I want to do. Is that the way to do it? No. Okay. So let's do it again. I go to the option and I choose a window. That's the option. All right. Okay, now I see it. Great. And I believe now I don't see you, but you see the slides. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I might fall out of my little box, I suppose. So let's go to it. As Andrea has said, I've been working on aesthetics a little bit, and I've been working on architecture a little bit, but I never talk about anything called aesthetic boredom. This is the first time. But what I have been doing about architecture seemed to be, to me, to be on the other side of what aesthetic boredom could be. More or less, this is the argument that I'm going to try to put together, although quite likely it will become something else. But let's see. The idea is this. First, we can experience boredom about architecture, co-architecture, which is something that I thought we could take for granted, but maybe it has to be discussed. Sorry, I think I stopped sharing, and that's not a good idea. Back to us. I apologize. I wanted to see you and I came back. Let's do it. I think I cannot see you at the same time. Let's assume that then. That's the first step that I was saying that I wanted to assume it, but I think it cannot be assumed too quickly. The second step of the argument is something like this. This boredom can be about the aesthetic quality distinctive of architectonic structures. And that's why I think we can call it aesthetic boredom. And then, and this is part of what I've been doing before, I will tell you very quickly what I think is the key distinctive aesthetic quality of architecture structures, co-architecture. And this is important because the way we usually talk, or the way people usually talk about architecture, is rather qua sculpture or qua three-dimensional objects, not co-architecture, which I think means co-created spaces. And the conclusion will be something like this. Proper aesthetic, let's see if I can get the pen. Proper aesthetic boredom about an architectural structure would be boredom caused by wanting and searching for, but failing to find, inhabitability in architectonic structure. That quality that I was talking about is the one that I call inhabitability, what I think is the key. So let's get to the task. I don't know, I need to respect the time, which is going to be a problem. And since I speak maybe a little bit too fast, that might be another problem. I will skip a few things. So since I don't know much about boredom, except probably having the experience, I took a quick look at some of the definitions that we can find out there. The Oxford Encyclopedia, the Oxford Dictionary says that boredom is the state of being bored, tedium, and ennui. As an adjective, it says worried, suffering from ennui, and then ennui, now we can get a little bit more. The Oxford Dictionary says is the feeling of mental weariness and dissatisfaction produced by want of occupation or by lack of interest in present surroundings or employments. One of the reasons why I want to bring this is this idea of feeling. Some of you have been talking about this. I recall in particular that John Eastwood, if I'm saying the name correctly, talk about this, and he left the question open whether it could be a mood or an emotion. In any case, I think that is an affective state is probably something that I will also hold on to, and then we'll see whether we can say a little bit more. Weariness, that is part of the definition of to be bored that we saw before, is defined as tedium or distaste induced by monotonous or uncongenial conditions or occupations, tiredness of a course of action, a state of things, a person, or things. Okay, I'm going to skip this. There were other definitions that I was going to throw here. The Cambridge Advanced Learning Dictionary says that bored is feeling unhappy. This, of course, we can always say, insofar as it's on the side of the negative emotions, it's a sort of feeling unhappy. But that is a little bit too vague. Because something is not interesting, this that looks silly, I think is not so silly. John Eastwood also talk about that. There is a prior wanting to find interest that fails in the case of boredom. So let's go to the argument. We can experience boredom of architecture, co-architecture. And here what I want to do is to appeal to your experience. We say, one of the problems is this. When we talk about boredom about something, and I believe in English, this is not the common way of talking, we say that we are bored with something, bored by something, and I have realized lately that there is a debate going on about what is the proper way. When we talk about emotions from the phenomenologies on, we learn, or we pay more attention to the idea that they are about something. And in fact, we say things of this sort. We say this book is boring, this movie is boring, this talk is boring, but we also say these clothes are boring, or Charles is boring. So sometimes we refer to things, but it looks like mainly what we have in mind is the experience. So reading this book is boring, watching this movie is boring, and so on. But it can also refer to objects or people. Now, when it comes to architecture, we talk quite often like this. This town is boring. This cafe is boring. Maybe this not so much. And here is probably the first problem, if I want to appeal to your everyday experience. When we say this town is boring, we usually refer rather to the life in the town. And what I want to say, what I want to say is that there is another way of talking about being bored about a town, for which we do not have a common expression. Maybe the new one that we can construct will be something of the sort, I am aesthetically bored by New York or by Madrid, which sounds a little bit awkward. And people usually don't talk like that in common language, but that will be the expression that we do not have, that I'm going to be talking about. So going back to, we have these two options at least. When we talk about the spaces, about cities or about architectonic structures, we refer to the life, but I think that we can also talk about this other sense. So I'm not talking about this cafe is boring because there is no interest in life, or because what happens here is not of sufficient interest, but the cafe as a space. That's what I'm talking about. Now, another problem that is crossing this is this, that I have been thinking about it lately. Lately means in the last 2 nights, which is a little bit too lately. We usually say, I am bored in general, or I am bored with or by something. And what I've been thinking is, it seems to me that they are not the same type of experiences. This might seem too obvious, but if we isolate only the being bored part, it might not be exactly of the same kind. When we say this part is boring or this book is boring, we do not really mean usually that this book is putting me in a state of that would be equivalent to saying I am bored. Um, I can hear some noise. I don't know if it's me. If it's me, I can try to fix it. If it's one of you, you think about it. Okay. So I'm saying this because in some of the distinctions that appear in some dictionaries, we see this. You use boring about something that makes you feel bored. That probably might not be quite the case. The city about which we are bored might not leave us in a state of I am bored, period. So again, and this is the problem within which I'm placing myself, to be bored about something in the same way that we say I am joyful about something or I am sad about something. In this case, about architecture. In this case, I'm going to say that we can feel bored about the creative space, and more specifically, and this is the third maybe sub-problem, about the aesthetic quality of spaces. So is this something that we can even talk about? And that's maybe the question before we get into what I think is aesthetic quality. Which type of things can be the intentional objects of our boredom about something? So these are some very general things, and maybe they're not very problematic, and maybe they allow us to continue. If we agree that boredom is a negative emotional state, whether it is a mood or whether it is an emotion or whether it's a feeling, or a negative emotional response towards something, then it looks like we could also be bored about an aesthetic quality. In principle, there doesn't seem to be a problem here. And we also can expect an opposite positive state to that of boredom, which in my case is the one that I'm going to refer as inhabitability. That's the discovery. Inhabitability will produce a type of excitement that is the one that will be the opposite to the aesthetic boredom about spaces. So I'm using excitement as the very general name for what could be the opposite to boredom in general, but I know that this probably we also can disagree. If we also accept that boredom about something is about experiences, people, or objects that we expect or want to expect to be interested in, and here recall in John Eastwood's conference, he said that every boredom seems to imply a sort of first desire. When you are bored, it looks like there is a desire for something that crashes against the uninteresting aspect of the objects, against a void, against the not finding anything interesting. This is important because otherwise we could be easily talking about indifference, and boredom, it seems to me, and I think it seems at least to all of you, at least those of you that I hear talking these days, that is not just that. It's an affective state of certain sort. There is a reaction of a negative kind. Okay, so we accept this. The opposite state would be caused by an object of our interest or concern. And I will link this in a second. I'm just creating the stage, and I'm going to place the aesthetic quality that I've been talking about here. Just a second. This is what I've been talking about. If we talk about boredom in general, there is a sort of desire that is general, but we do not find an object of interest. This is that crash that seems to be at the roots of boredom. If we talk about boredom about something in particular, there is a desire for something, but we do not find the appropriate object for it. Now, this is also tricky. Somebody mentioned in one of the questions the case of being bored in class, but being excited about what could happen after class, about the summer vacation. Is that boredom? If that boredom is about the class, should we assume that there is a wanting something about the class? If we stick to this assumption that there is a desire, then we should say that there must be a sort of desire, or maybe there was a desire to find something in the class. That desire, of course, could have been very limited, and that crash with the reality of a very boring lecture or talk or whatever it is. So on the other side, which is the side, I'm going to talk about excitement as that general opposite of boredom, and I'm going to talk about inhabitability as the specific cause of excitement in this case, in the case of architecture. This is what I was talking about before, that we do say things of this kind: this city is boring, and we usually mean by that life or living in the city is boring. This is not what I'm talking about. But we do not have a common expression for something of this kind. I feel aesthetically bored with, or aesthetic boredom for, this city or this building or this cafe, and so on. So premise number 2, the boredom about architecture can be about the aesthetic quality distinctive of architectonic structures. This is what I've been suggesting. And this is important because usually when we talk about architecture, when we talk in everyday life, but also when experts or supposed experts talk about it, quite often we talk about what we see. So it's still very common. Here we are in front of this building, and we see this feature of this building, and the features of this building clearly are unappealing, and so on and so forth, and therefore there is not much merit. I'm simplifying, of course, a lot, but if we talk like this, we are not talking about architecture, co-architecture, when we talk only about perceivable features. It seems to me, and this can be debated, but it's not. It is an issue, maybe not a huge issue, but it is. The word it means is more problematic. That architecture is about creating spaces. Now, before I go any further, let me give you an example. This is a cube, you can say, and a cube in principle might be boring. Well, this is a house in Ibiza where I was a few days ago, and if you look at it from outside, it's a cube. And notice that I'm giving you pictures on purpose where you can see more or less of what is around. And I will talk about that in a second. These are some pictures from inside. So being a cube or not being a cube doesn't make necessarily the building boring. There are many other things. There is another reason why I'm bringing this picture, and it's because when we talk about creative spaces, we usually think about the enclosed space. We can also think about the space outside. So this thing is creating a space outside and is creating spaces inside. And very, very important here is that I cannot make you experience a space with pictures. We need to be in them, which is probably the main problem. And let me say something about this. This is a big issue when we talk about architecture. What are we talking about when we talk about perceiving spaces? I think we're talking about this. This is not a standard. Perceiving a space is experiencing what we are doing now insofar as it implies occupying a space. So when I am occupying, when we do something, we're always occupying. Experiencing ourselves as occupying requires something a little bit extra. But more important is this, is perceiving the possibilities regarding what we can do and experience insofar as we are at this very moment situated in a unique relation to certain physical interactions of space. Let me give you an example. This and this are two different spaces. And some of you might be a little bit upset. No. It's the same space, but they're decorated differently. Decoration creates a space. Textures create a space. We don't have time to discuss all this, but I want at least to bother you with it. Think about you debating with your husband or your wife or your loved one about whether you want exposed brick in your kitchen or not. That is a life or death discussion. You hate the brick or you love the brick. Now, what is important here for the purpose of experiencing spaces is that what happens to you when you expose the brick of the kitchen? You might spend more time in the kitchen having coffee. Your behavior in the space has changed. That to me is crucial to identify changes in perception of space. So there are many more things here. By the way, I'm showing you this picture of that ugly building and this other one. They come from a page. So these are not selected by me. I cannot really give you an example. It will be a boring space. But I'm going to try to tell you what are the features of that space. This is always personal, and I'm going to defend that too. This is why we will not all agree on a space that might be. I used to only give examples such as a parking lot. or a cemetery. But a cemetery in the US, for example, can be a beautiful garden. So it's very different from a cemetery in Spain. And it will depend on many other factors, personal factors, the way we evaluate and we perceive. Anyway, this comes from a page that is titled Beautifully Boring Pictures of Typical American Architecture. I do not think we can call them beautiful if they're boring. I'm putting this into extremes. Habitability is the feature, the positive feature that we identify and we appreciate. That was a hand up. I guess maybe that means that I need to. Okay, this is another example from that page. This could be another example. And notice also that I'm not thinking about repetitive spaces. I'm talking about the spaces that you can say, this is boring. Okay, so this could be other examples. Very quickly, let me get to the idea that I am suggesting. So this is what I think is the aesthetic quality of spaces that we are all looking for as soon as we are in a space. And I mean all of us in our daily life. Habitability is the capacity of a space has to increase the qualitative value of the experience of realizing certain activities in it. So habitability is something that appears when we bring our ideal of life to the architectonic structure, to the physical, to the given. This is why it's always personal. So this could be examples of habitability, but this might depend on each of us. If in this room you see possibilities, or in this cafe, to realize activities that are important for you, that at the same time the experience of those activities increase, then you see habitability. But notice that we don't need to do a lot of evaluation for this. You enter into a cafe and you already know that you like it or not. When you're looking for an apartment, this is a train station. This is an airport. This is one apartment where I was in a conference in Paris, an Airbnb apartment that I found with a lot of habitability. It has 2 floors, it had a little balcony, it was not too big, it was on top of the building. And little by little I realized that I like all those features. This is very important, what you see through the windows. That places the apartment in a context of possibilities. Okay, so I'm going to tell you quickly, let's go to the conclusion. What is then aesthetic boredom? Is the other extreme. Aesthetic boredom is our emotional response to architectonic structures, to the spaces created by them, which is what we're talking about, when our search for habitability in that structure results in little or negative perceived habitability. This means that aesthetic boredom is not a form of indifference. So, and this is important because I do believe that all of us are always looking for habitability. And we are not indifferent when we don't find it. You enter into a hotel room, and even if it's a shoebox, you still are trying to look for possibilities in it. Sometimes you do not find them. Sometimes what you find doesn't increase the quality of the experience of doing any of the things that you consider valuable. By the way, and here I am defending this from a hotel room, the reason why we hate so much hotel rooms is in part because our life cannot develop through it. It's not so much as we usually think that there are strange spaces that are not familiar. In a hotel room, you need to write a paper on the bed. You need to give a talk from the bed. You need to have your sandwich on the bed. This is not the way we usually administer our occupation of spaces. Okay, so I think I have to finish. This could be other examples from other pages of spaces that will produce aesthetic boredom of this kind. What could be the lessons for this? Well, for architects, that they should take into account what they build, because our quality of life is at stake. And for each of us, also, that it matters where we live. Not only the cities where we live, but the offices where we work, the hotel rooms that we occupy, the apartments that we occupy when we give talks, and so on and so forth. And this applies also to public spaces. And let me give you just an example of daily life. When you're looking for an apartment, what do? You go through the rooms of the apartment, and you're telling yourself the life that you could have in each of these rooms. You're telling yourself the possibilities for the life that you want to live. And then you find the habitability of the space. And not only that, then you find a balcony in the corner. And it's not just a balcony that allows you to breathe, but it's a balcony that has other features that increases the quality of what you like to do. It's better to read Baudelaire in this balcony than in that other balcony that you had when you were living in that other city. This will apply, and of course, very important is when you go to look for an apartment, where it's located. All these relations are important. Why? Because your life is going to be developed through them. Okay, let's stop there. I apologize.
Thank you very much, Abel, for a thought-provoking and fascinating talk. I'm going to see if there are any hands and if there are any questions in the chat.
I can use this time to apologize also.
There's a question in the chat. I can read it, and then when people raise their hands, we'll go there. Beautiful building cannot be boring? Question. I think the feeling of boring is subjective. It may not necessarily have to do with aesthetics, but I agree with the idea of boredom has to do with experience. So I suppose the question is whether beautiful and boring can be co-instantiated in some architectonic fashion.
So the main problem is, or the two problems. First, what do we mean when we say that a building is beautiful? If we're talking about how it looks, we're not talking about a building qua building. A building is beautiful, quotation marks, is aesthetically valuable, as I would say, or more valuable, or is more inhabitable, using, or it has more inhabitability, which is the word that I'm using. Sorry. So talking about a building as an object is not talking about a building qua building. Now, you might like that building that you have in front of your window. That doesn't mean that you like it qua space. How do we experience spaces? Occupying it, doing things in a space. You like the balcony because reading in the balcony feels better than reading in that other balcony. You like that corner in the coffee shop because the coffee and listening to the music and talking to people feels better. So space increases the quality of the experience. Those are the spaces that are aesthetically valuable. And there was a second part in the question. Andreas, do you recall it, or am I supposed to recall it? Or?
No, I think I was just registering agreement with your talk. No.
Yeah, but there was a second part, I think, in the question that you were passing to me, Andreas, and I think I'm missing it. So the answer, according to what I'm saying, we need to talk about what is beautiful. If we're talking about aesthetically valuable, then what I will say is no, it cannot be aesthetically valuable and boring. An aesthetically valuable building is exciting. It gives you more possibilities. And it has nothing to do with the size of the space. That little duplex that you found in Alfama in Lisbon seems to have everything. And on top of that is cozy. And on top of that is warm. And so on and so forth. Now, here is where our personal wantings play a key role. We all have. Now, there are studies that show that, for example, humans do not like streets that are too wide. Humans do not like to cross squares in the middle. We are, as some people said, wall-hugging animals. All these are, so to speak, more universal features that architects should pay attention to. The interesting ones are the personal ones. But notice also, sorry, Andreas, I finished with this mini speech. The very intense debates that we have when we look for an apartment with someone that we think that we know very well, a husband or a wife, the disputes are huge. How do you dare telling me that you like that place? That place is awful. I love that living room. That living room is awful. And we have been living together. It's a very personal decision. But what I think we're looking for is we're looking for inhabitability, all of us. And also when it's only for one activity, when it's a coffee shop, when it's a tennis court. Sorry, Andreas, I went too far.
No, just we have two questions, and I think we have 1.5 minutes. So I'm just going to go with whoever I see first. Marius, you go, and then hopefully we'll get the other question, and we can discuss it later.
Okay, so very quickly, thank you very much for this fantastic perspective, because this is more than just presentation. This is just the philosophy of boredom, a new approach, I suppose. And I thought about Marc Augé concept of non-places, yeah, and how somehow it fits with your perspective of inhabitability, yeah. So the non-places, like non-anthropological places, yeah, non-places for, I don't know, maybe robots, but not humans, yeah, that you cannot habitate, somehow include in your personality, in your imaginary, yeah, of, because you said about potentially visions of potential usage of and the relationship with the place, and yeah, we don't see this relation somehow, and then we assume that some place is boring, yeah, because we don't assume that we could be have a meaningful relation with this place.
This is what. Oh, Mario, sorry for interrupting you. Do you finish very quickly?
Yes.
I do not think we should talk about no places. There are places, but I create another expression, which is this. We usually talk about wasting time. I have an expression that is we waste space. We waste space, for example, when we're commuting. In our life, we're constantly looking for good spaces to do the activities that we do. When you are commuting, well, what we do, we transform the bus into a reading room and you open a book. But that in principle will be, yeah, usually people give spaces of like airports as no spaces. I don't think it's a concept that really, it is a space. In an airport, you can play a soccer game with a child. There are possibilities. In an airport, you can start wandering and you can create the introduction of a paper and maybe even the first chapter of the paper. So it will depend. But so the idea, I think, that is something that we share, or I share with the idea of no spaces, that there are no possibilities. That will be the case of pure aesthetic boredom, in which you do not find any possibilities, and of course, you are looking for them. We're looking for them. And we're not indifferent. We feel upset. This is what I want actually to highlight. That there are spaces that are, especially, I show you some of those pictures where the highways cross, that they can be also no places. They put you in a bad mood. Now, I might be talking for myself, but I haven't done a careful study. But it's not that you pass to them and it's okay. No. There should be, we're looking for something with it. Sorry, Andreas, I apologize. I promise I was going to respect time. I am I should be kicked out of this conference directly.
Yeah, no need to apologize to me. There are more questions, and this is just an indication of how exciting and thought-provoking the talk is. I think we'll have to table them and move on to the next talk, so I apologize to Anna. Maybe if we can put them in the chat, then Abel can see the question. I don't know if it's too hard to write the question, then maybe after this panel we can have the conversation. Just wanted to thank Abel, and thanks so much for the talk.